You're writing today about an IMF report talking about China might become a larger economy than the United States a lot quicker than people think. Is that the case?
That's right. Nobody seems to have picked this up. The IMF dropped a bombshell sometime, I think, in the last week, very quietly on their website, and no one seems to have picked this up. They have now put out a forecast of when the Chinese economy will overtake that of the United States. When you talk to a lot of Wall Street economists and talking heads, they will tell you, oh, it's decades away and all that stuff. Nonsense. It is 5 years' time, 2016. That is the date put out by the IMF. Of course, all forecasts are subject to change, as we have learned. However, this is the IMF's latest forecast. It compares the economies on what is called a purchasing power parity basis. What that means is it's comparing it in real terms. On a dollar basis, purely using current exchange rates, the date will be much further in the distance. And that's what a lot of people focus on. However, that, I would argue, is a deeply false comparison, because the market exchange rates are distorted. They're distorted for two reasons. The first is China, as we know, spends a massive amount of money distorting its own exchange rate to drive down the renminbi, to keep it low, keep it artificially undervalued, heavily undervalued. And the second is the U.S. dollar, because it is the world's reserve currency, is intrinsically going to be have more demand than it would otherwise, so you could argue it is intrinsically overvalued.
Now, just 10 years ago, the U.S. economy was 3 times the size as China's. So to think that in 5 years it could be smaller than China's, can you just take us through a little bit of how this has all happened? How do we get to this point?
Well, I mean, essentially, you know, the U.S. growth has been, it's actually been okay for a developed country. Obviously, we've gone through a huge recession. Some of us would argue that a lot of the growth was illusory anyway. It was all that activity building houses no one was ever going to live in. But meanwhile, China has gone through the most extraordinary industrial transformation. I mean, up until this moment, probably the biggest, sort of most remarkable economic or industrial transformation in history was that of the United States in a few decades in the late 19th century, to go from a relatively small economy to a gigantic economy. China has now put that achievement in the shade. The industrial and economic development of China has been extraordinary. Now, this has taken place behind a very unashamedly mercantilist, nationalistic, call it protectionist if you like, economic policy. We pursue, of course, some form of free trade these days. What used to be known as the American system is now more a sort of free trade system, and China does not. China has really set out, and they have set out basically to capture economic activity. They have basically lent us money in return for taking all our factories, to put it in simple terms.
Is there anything that can be done to slow this down or to prevent it happening 5 years from now, or do you think this is just inevitable? It's going to happen either way?
Well, there are two questions. I mean, what you can do to improve the performance of the U.S. economy is a story maybe for another day. Everyone will have their opinions on it. What I would concentrate on is, even if, I mean, listen, there are a lot of warning signs in the Chinese economy. Housing has just gone crazy. So, you know, it would not shock me if the Chinese juggernaut blew a tire sometime in the next couple of years, and that could slow down this crossover point. If the U.S. Economic activity picked up, that would also slow it down. So maybe it'll, you know, it's certainly possible that it could be delayed by a few years. However, it's not going to be delayed by that long. Ultimately, these lines will cross. They are converging very quickly. China has got, what is it, 5 times the U.S. population. Or no, is it 3 or 4 times the U.S. population? And, you know, so, and that's sort of the underpinning of this. China is catching up and will overtake very shortly. We are moving away from the age of America, which has been, you know, we've lived in really since, there's no one alive who remembers before America was the dominant economy in the world. There's no one alive today. You'd have to go back to the mid-Victorian period.